The Sunday School lesson for July 14th, 2013 is God Disciplines His People. Background passage is 2 Kings chapter 17, verses 1 through 20. The focal verses are 2 Kings 17, verses 7 through 15, and verses 18 through 20. What this lesson is about: God's people were judged for breaking the covenant. They were conquered and taken into exile. God does not tolerate sin. Why is this lesson important? A covenant relationship with God includes obedience to His lordship. Just because we have entered into a relationship with God does not mean we are immune to discipline. The nation of Israel shows us the kinds of things that happen when people fail to live in obedience to God. And this lesson can help you evaluate your obedience to God and repent of trusting in other things. Just some background on this passage. We are dealing with the kingdom of Israel. And the kingdom of Israel started out as one unified kingdom consisting of the 12 tribes of Israel. It was established by Joshua. As Joshua led the nation into Canaan and they established Israel, it would eventually culminate as a kingdom under the reign of Saul and then David. However, under David's son, Solomon, things didn't go too well. And the people were not happy with the Davidic kingship. They thought Solomon had been too rough, but Rehoboam, Solomon's son, made things worse. And the northern tribes, mainly 10 northern tribes, broke off and formed their own kingdom. This kingdom pretty much rejected the law throughout its existence. It never had a good king, and it always had problems, and God was constantly sending prophets trying to get them back. Now, Israel divided into two kingdoms. The northern kingdom was composed mostly of the 10 tribes and retained the name Israel. The capital of Israel was Samaria, and they had a variety of dynasties. Different kings would rise up, usually by killing each other. Whoever was the victor would become the king. It was not a good thing for Israel. The southern tribe, the southern kingdom, was composed primarily of the tribe of Judah. Judah, Benjamin, parts of Levi that were in that area, also fragments from the other tribes, basically refugees who fled from Israel. They settled in Judah, but essentially it was mainly the tribe of Judah, hence the kingdom was called the Kingdom of Judah. It was ruled by the Davidic kings, David's descendants. The descendants of David, the Davidic dynasty, also helped rule, and not all of those kings were good, but they were certainly better than the kings of Israel. Now, at one point, the kingdom of Israel allied itself with the Aramean kingdom, whose capital was Damascus. And they allied to attack Judah. They assaulted Judah, and it looked as though they were going to finally overcome Judah. And at that point, Judah's king, Ahaz, asked for help. Now, Isaiah told him, don't trust in political alliances, instead, trust in the Lord. However, Ahaz did not trust in God. He was not like his father or his forefathers. He was a very godless, heathen pagan in his outlook, and did some very horrible things. So what he did, instead of trusting in God, as Isaiah told him to, he called for help from the Assyrian kingdom. And the king of Assyria was more than happy to come down and help. And one of the things he did was he destroyed the Aramean kingdom. He conquered Damascus, killed its king, carried off its people into captivity. And Ahaz was delighted with this. And he gave treasures. Basically, he stripped the temple of gold and silver and sent it as tribute to the Assyrians. He also went and worshipped with the Assyrians in Damascus and came back and brought their worship practices back. He essentially adopted their idols, their religion, as his own, partly probably as a sign of showing his loyalty to the Assyrians, but also he was already a pagan anyway, and so he just simply saw this as a superior religion for him to follow. Israel was not destroyed at this time, but the Assyrians did invade it. They conquered the Israelites, or the kingdom of Israel, and forced them to be a client kingdom. Basically, Israel was subject to the Assyrians and had to pay taxes, pay tribute, show their loyalty to the Assyrian kingdom. And that went well for a while. However, after a while, there came one of the kings of Israel, Hoshea, thought he had a better idea. He did not want to pay tribute to the Assyrians. He wanted to break apart from them and not be under their authority. And so he started looking around. Well, there was only one other power in the region that could possibly even think about competing with Assyria, and that was Egypt. Egypt has always been a superpower in that region. And so oftentimes the kings of the smaller kingdoms would look either to Egypt or they would look to one of the Mesopotamian kingdoms like Assyria for help. So the king of Israel, Hoshea, he goes to the Egyptian king. He basically sends him tribute. He stops sending money to Assyria. He stops basically paying taxes or his tribute to Assyria and starts sending envoys, ambassadors to Egypt to try to get them to help him break free of Assyria. And it goes unnoticed for a while. It takes a while for the Assyrian king to notice the lack of income coming in from Israel, and he doesn't hear initially about these envoys, but word gets to him. And he learns that Israel is basically in open rebellion against the Assyrian Empire. And by this time, Assyria is ruled by Shalmaneser V. And he is not a tolerant individual, especially of someone he would consider a traitor. So he brings his armies down to Israel and destroys it. He's able to capture, early in the campaign, he's able to capture Hoshea and put him in prison. Israel then is without a leader, or an effective leader, and the Assyrians siege the town or the city of Samaria for 3 years. Samaria is able to hold out for 3 years, but finally the Assyrians break through and are able to destroy the city and take the survivors into captivity. They carry them off into exile. And this happened in 722 BC. And it's one of the most important events in the history of Israel and really of the Bible. The Assyrian captivity of Israel is a major moment in their history because the bulk of the 10 tribes of Israel are carried off in captivity, never to return. There's an expectation, even into the New Testament era, that the Messiah will bring back the 10 tribes. And there's even some prophecies in the New Testament regarding that. That's for another lesson. But this is the monumental, because everyone looks to this moment in Israel's history when Israel, the 10 tribes, are carried off. And it becomes a warning, it becomes a major theme among the prophets from this point forward. And again, even into the New Testament. Judah is again warned, but unfortunately Judah does not listen to the message. But Assyria destroys Israel. They carry off its people into captivity, and that's the end of Israel. Israel no longer exists as a nation. So at this point, you would think it's just simply a story. It's, on one level, it's simply the story of a poor political maneuver. But that's exactly, well, that's not the message that the writer of 2 Kings wants us to get from this. It's not about bad political maneuvering. It's not about a tiny nation getting gobbled up by a regional superpower. The author of 2 Kings wants us to know this is part of a larger drama, and it's something that God is totally in control of. Because there were a lot of folks at that time who had said, how would God let this happen to his people? So in 2 Kings chapter 17, beginning in verse 7, the author of 2 Kings tries to explain why this happened. Verse 7, now this came about because the sons of Israel had sinned against the Lord their God, who had brought them up from the land of Egypt, from under the hand of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and they had feared other gods, and walked in the customs of the nations whom the Lord had driven out before the sons of Israel, and in the customs of the kings of Israel which they had introduced. The sons of Israel did things secretly which were not right against the Lord their God. Moreover, they built for themselves high places in all their towns, from watchtower to fortified city. They set for themselves sacred pillars and asherim on every high hill and under every green tree. And there they burned incense on all the high places, as the nations did which the Lord had carried away to exile before them. And they did evil things, provoking the Lord. They served idols, concerning which the Lord had said to them, "You shall not do this thing." Yet the Lord warned Israel and Judah through all his prophets and every seer, saying, "Turn from your evil ways and keep my commandments, my statutes, according to all the law which I commanded your fathers, and which I sent to you through my servants the prophets." However, they did not listen, but stiffened their neck like their fathers, who did not believe in the Lord their God. They rejected his statutes and his covenant which he made with their fathers, and his warnings with which he warned them. And they followed vanity and became vain, and went after the nations which surrounded them, concerning which the Lord had commanded them not to do like them. So we have a picture here. The author simply says, God brought Israel out of Egypt. He delivered them from bondage, and he established them in this land. He had taken away other people before them, and he had established Israel, and they were supposed to obey the covenant. God had let them enter into a covenant. He didn't force them upon it, but asked them to join in, and they had joined in readily and had pledged themselves. And God had warned them, you must obey the covenant. But what we see here is that they broke the law every way they could. First, they did it secretly. Verse 9, the sons of Israel did things secretly which were not right against the Lord their God. But then they went from moving in secret to outright rebellion by building idols in high places. High places were essentially altars on hills and mountaintops. Most primitive religions saw mountaintops and the tops of hills as sacred realms because it was closer to heaven. And they thought that their prayers, or at least one train of thought with that, was that they thought their prayers would go to the gods faster because they were closer to them. Also, it was a commanding height, and it inspired the awe of the surroundings. So they would worship their gods from these high heights. They would also cut up trees. An equivalent would be sort of like a totem pole. Basically carved trees that were set up to worship certain fertility gods. And Israel was doing that openly throughout the land. It says from the watchtower to the fortified city. Basically, from small farms all the way up to the big cities, they were engaged in idolatry. And they did all the practices of the local nations. We see that their kings engaged in wickedness. Their kings engaged in the same worship practices as the neighboring countries. The people basically were not following the covenant. They were not following the dietary restrictions. They were not following the how they were supposed to appear, how they were supposed to worship. None of these things they were doing. They were disobeying every commandment, especially, "Thou shalt have no other gods before me." The very beginning of the Ten Commandments. So they were breaking all of these different rules.